All right. This is our
Okay.
episode 1.
Episode 1. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Captain Jack. I am the last true pirate of the Caribbean. Retired. I wrote a book a few years ago with the intention of publishing it or publishing it online. And after watching a lot of stories on YouTube, I decided that everybody has a short attention span and nobody wants to read a book hardly anymore. So I've been told that I tell a pretty good story, so I'm going to tell you mine. Okay. When I turned 18, I was given a gift of a all-inclusive dive trip to Cayman Brac. So I got up early one morning and got on the DC-3 airplane, which most of you probably don't realize is a very old airplane. It's also a very dependable airplane. They were real big in the Caribbean, island hopping. So I got on this plane.
What year was this?
1978.
Okay.
I got on the plane and the plane was packed jam full of galvanized scuba tanks going to the dive shop on the island. Must have been over 100 of them. And I thought to myself, well, maybe this airplane won't even get off the ground with all this weight, because I had been used to small planes. My father had owned like a 172 Cessna, and you had to be really careful with the weight. Evidently, you don't have to worry about that with a DC-3. So I got on the plane, sat down. There was 4 other people in the plane with us going to the island that day for a dive trip. It was 10 days and it was all inclusive, room, board, rent, dive trip, scuba tanks, everything you needed was except beer and stuff at the bar. So I got on and I started looking out the window of the window seat, and there was oil coming out of the engine cowling all over the wing. And I, being a pretty good mechanic, I was somewhat concerned that the airplane I was flying across the ocean in was leaking oil pretty severely. So I watched it for a few minutes and it didn't quit or get any better, so I run up to the cockpit and told the captain. I said, "Captain, we're losing oil out of the engine on the right side. It's pouring out all over the wing." He jumped up like in a fake panic, which I later learned was fake, and run back to the back of the airplane and looking out the window, and he's looking out the window, and then he went to the bathroom, and he comes back, and he says, "Oh yeah, that's good." I said, "It's good that there's oil leaking on the..." "Oh yeah, that means we got some left," he said. I said, "Okay, I get it. We got lots of oil." He said, "Yeah, that thing holds about 55 gallons. "Ah, I see. Big radial engine, 1,500 horsepower engines this airplane had. And so then all of a sudden the co-pilot jumps up and decides he needs to go for a minute, and he says, "Take my seat." So I took his chair and held on to the yoke, because I used to flying with Dad in a little 172, and boy, what a difference there was between that plane and a 172. It was like flying a Mack truck semi, 18-wheeler loaded down it. You could feel the engine through the yoke, the vibration on the airframe, every little. It was just amazing difference. And so I held the yoke for a minute. I think it actually was on autopilot anyway. But then the co-pilot got back in his seat, and I went back to the chair, and pretty soon, boom, we were in Cayman Brac. Cayman Brac is one of the 3 islands in the Cayman Island Changers: Grand Cayman, Little Cayman, and Cayman Brac. Cayman Brac was pretty much just 1 or 2 resorts at the time. And I got off the plane and I was really hungry. I mean, it wasn't like there was any, this was a really luxurious airline or anything. There was no food service or even drinks. I was dying of thirst and hunger. Being a young guy, I was hungry. So I got off the plane and run down into the resort. It was called the Buccaneer, the resort. And I poked my head in the dining room, and there's nobody. Looking at my watch, and the watch says 12, lunch, you know. And I hear some noise coming from the kitchen. So I poked my head in the kitchen. I said, when's going on for lunch? And she says, oh, you're an hour early. Well, there's an hour time difference between Central Florida, Tampa, and Cayman Brac. So I went out and sat down, and a lady came out, a big island lady. She says, my name is Miss Elizabeth, and are you hungry? And I said, oh, I'm starving. And I had been taught to be very respectful and very kind to women by my grandmother, who mostly raised me. So I was put on my best charm and my sweetest talk, and she went back in the kitchen and made me a humongous ham sandwich. And it was delicious. And I told her so, repeatedly. And she says, well, you can get your room set up, and we'll get you in your room, and then tomorrow morning, this dive starts. We go 2 tanks in the morning, then 2 tanks in the afternoon. We come back in for lunch. I said, great. Come to find out that she owned the resort and the fish house and the bar and pretty much every other business on the island. And her name was Elizabeth, so we called her Miss Elizabeth. And so when I sat down for dinner that evening, she said, just find your table, and there's a placard, a little card on the table with your name. That's where you sit. And I said, okay. And I got down, sat down, and there was a placard there, and my name, and across from the two chair table. And I sat down, and there was another card there, and didn't think much of it. And all of a sudden, this very attractive young island woman come walking up and sat down and introduced herself, and her name was Elizabeth, but everybody called her Beth. So I said, okay, and we talked a little bit, and she says, oh yes, Miss Elizabeth is my grandmother. I said, okay. And she says she wants to apologize because Miss Elizabeth was something of a matchmaker. She was trying to make a match, which is all she ever did. She was all about it all the time. Beth told me that she was a medical student and going to school in London, was only back for the summer to stay with her mother and grandmother. And then she'd be going back to school. I said, that sounds good, you know. And she planned to come back to the island and practice medicine on the island because there was no doctor at the time. So we had a nice dinner, went to bed, and got up next morning about 8 o'clock, got in the boat, and I noticed the captain had a broken arm. And I asked him about it. His name was Gary, he was a local man. And I said, how'd you break your arm? He says, I was an occupational hazard, he said. You know, people were nice on the island, but they weren't like family or anything, you know. They didn't invite you into their homes or anything like that, but they were nice. And so I said, okay, can I help, today? And he says, yeah, Beth is going to be the dive master and you can help with the boat. I said, that's fine. He said, do you have any experience with the boat? And I said, yes, I'm a licensed captain, have been for about 1.5 years. He said, that's great, you'll come in handy then. So I did, I took the wheel and he pointed which direction to go, and we went out to the reef and anchored up and had a wonderful dive. I've never seen anything like the coral that was there. It no longer exists now because hurricane had destroyed it all, but there was staghorn coral that grew from the bottom of the sandy bottom up 20 feet all the way to the surface. Never saw anything like it in any other Caribbean island or in the Keys, the Florida Keys. And we dove the 2 tanks, come back in for lunch, and having a nice lunch when I saw this fella and coming down the beach. There was 3 people. One of them in a white sport coat with no tie and barefoot, and 2 other guys with him in dark blue sport coat with no tie. And this looked really out of place because we're all wearing t-shirts and shorts, you know, it didn't make much sense. And he comes down the beach and makes a beeline right for the table that we were sitting in at the bar there. We were having lunch. And he grabs Beth's arm and starts to twist it really hard as she starts to holler. Well, that was it for me. It didn't take but a matter of microseconds for me to jump up, grab the chair I was sitting in, and beat him over the head with it until he was unconscious. He put that guy right on the sand, and I mean unconscious, like bad unconscious. Lucky I didn't kill him, because that would have been a problem, you know, me landing on this island, been there a day, and charged for murder. So I didn't really, I was thankful that I didn't kill the guy. Although that, what would have made me, infuriated me, was he would actually torturing a woman, basically, you know. And so about that second, I hear the undeniable loading of a 12-gauge pump shotgun behind me. And I look over, and it's Captain Gary, who also happened to be the sheriff of the island. And he just pumped and loaded a shotgun and was pointing at the other two guys that were with him. And Beth looks over at me and she says, "He's the guy you just put the chair on his head, is the guy that broke Gary's arm." I said, "Oh, he's not a friend of Gary's then, is he?" You know. No, she said they were both basically drug smugglers and thieves. I said, "Ah, okay." And so we promptly told the other two to drag their buddy with them and get the hell off the beach. You know, after that, the locals on the island were friendlier and much more respectful, and possibly even a little afraid, because I went, you know, basically berserk when he started twisting her arm. And Miss Elizabeth, the grandma, she gave me a big hug and a thanks, and said that anything you wanted at the bar, beer and all, was on the house from now on. And I said, "That sounds good." And the second day, we got up, diving, did the same thing, and we heard back from the local clinic that our buddy in the white suit was going to be incapacitated for several weeks. He had a broken collarbone and a concussion, but he wasn't dead, which was good, because I didn't want to go to jail. So, you know, it's a difficult thing when you attack people, that you have to be careful that you don't want to kill them. It's rough sometimes. You have to control yourself a little bit. And the next day we went diving, and I look over the edge of the reef, and I look down about 60 feet of water, and there's an unmistakable ballast pile of a very old wreck. In you know, all through the 16th and 17th centuries, there's Spanish galleons would meet up in Havana from Cartagena, from Mexico, would all meet up there for the once-a-year big shipment of gold and silver back to Spain. And I had dove on these wrecks in 1733 when the bunch sank off of the Keys, and the 1715 fleet, which sank off of Vero Beach. So I was very familiar with what they looked like. And to the average person, they just look like a pile of round, smooth river rock, which is what they are, because all the wood is gone by a long time. And we dove on the wreck and researched it a little bit, looked at it, found a few artifacts, and got back in the boat and went back to shore for lunch. And that evening we had a really nice dinner, barbecue right on the beach, with all kinds of pork, pulled pork and pork ribs and stuff. And then they introduced me at the bar, at their insistence, to rum and coke, which I had only drank a few beers. I'm not much of a drinker. My father never was much of a drinker either, but rum and coke tasted pretty good after a day of diving. And